recording. And with this said, Moshe, you have the flight control. Welcome to our group.
Great, thank you very much. My mic is open. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Sasha. I thank you for the opportunity. And welcome everybody. And I think there are some people who are, yeah, we're good. Thank you all for joining and being in together here. My pleasure. I will take about half a minute to set up my presentation because Zoom always reorganizes screens. So it might take a second. Give me a tiny bit of time to take care of this. And while I do that, I go here. This part I think is done. I think this part is done. I'm going to share my screen now and see if Zoom likes it. If not, I'll do some more adjustments. You should be seeing my slides. Can you confirm that you see a slide right now?
Yes.
Okay. So I have one last tiny adjustment. And off we go. So, yes. So thank you, Sasha. Today we're going to talk about risk management in Agile. I never heard anybody in the Agile world talk about risk management. And it is as important as in waterfall or any other approach. It does mean, if you do Agile, it does not mean that there is no risk, right? There is also risk in Agile projects. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to adjust some more. There we go. Right, we're good now. So let's move right in. First of all, it's the welcome. Let's talk about a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk generally about project risk very, very briefly because
I'm sorry, Moshe. I'm not sure if you are in presentation mode.
I am in presentation mode. Is there a moment?
The menus on the top are still visible.
Oh, the menus up here? How do I hide them? I think I'll have to go into settings to do that.
Then never mind. It's not a big deal.
These selections up here, right?
Yeah.
I hope it will not be a problem. Please let me know.
Somebody gave a hint. F11.
F11?
Yes.
It doesn't hide it. It just makes this screen.
You see, this is the power of a team.
All right, one moment. It just closed my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what you get when you play with Zoom. Try to be smarty pants with Zoom. It has its own life. Okay, so I hope you can see now. So like I said, we'll talk about project risk in general very briefly. Then we talk more about specifically for Agile projects or Agile life and Agile environments. We will see that risk is really built into Agile and Scrum and things like that. And you'll see there are a lot of characteristics of Agile projects which are risk oriented, if you want. So there's a lot of already existing, but a lot of existing risk mitigation and other things already kind of built in automatically into Agile. But usually it's not enough. And usually we would like to do more to make our project safe or as low risk as possible. So we will spend most of the time to just see a bunch of tools, techniques, tricks and techniques that you might be able to use in order to, and work with risk and handle risk better in your projects. Again, there is no single well-defined official methodology that says follow these processes and do these things. It's just a bunch of techniques and tools, and much more also awareness. Let's go in and see what that means. Usually I'd like to my presentations to be interactive. So feel free to ask, agree. It's okay to disagree. It's very good if you can, alert me to things that I don't know. Maybe I'm happy to learn and so on. And let's try to have fun. Excuse me. Few words about me. I started actually as an aeronautical engineer many, many years ago. I then did a turn in my career, moved into computer science and got my PhD in computer science quite a few years ago. I've been in IT world since 1997. So again, all my life I was project manager or around project management, both agile and waterfall. Many, many different projects, many companies. Since 2004, I was officially a project manager. I got my PMP. For those of you familiar, in 2004, well, exactly 20 years ago. Interesting. Worked on a variety of companies, from startups, really small startups like 8 people, and up all the way to Walmart, which, if you don't know, is the largest company in the world in terms of number of employees. And I actually want to throw a question here, without Googling it. Anybody can guess how many employees does Walmart have? Any guesses? Don't cheat. Don't look. Don't Google it now.
150,000.
150,000. Any other guesses? Come on, guesses are free.
There is a little chat storm. I see 20,000,
20,000.
100,000, 175,000,
Okay, more or less everybody around the same area.
50,000.
So you're welcome to Google. 2.1 million. Okay, welcome to Walmart. 2.1 million worldwide. So I used to say, I remember that when I used to work there, I used to say that the CEO of Walmart is actually like a prime minister or a president of a company, of a country. 2.1, it's nice. Anyway, so I worked on their, back then, on their e-commerce website. And there was a bunch of other companies, including Visa, Nokia, Google, and so on. Currently, I'm actually a freelance consultant around Agile. I do coaching, training, all these words that I'm sure you know about. If you are interested in my services, I'm happy to help. I'm also an instructor for UC Santa Cruz and UC Berkeley extensions, teaching project management classes. I'm starting a couple of classes next week actually. I've been doing it for at least 10 years now. So as you can see, I'm just swimming around project management all my life, all my professional life. I also have a bunch of certificates, PMP, Certified Scrum Professional, a couple others, Kanban, and so on. So that's just a little bit about me. Let's now go into the actual meat, into the stuff we want to cover today. Okay, and we start by saying that every project has risk. Of course, I mean, you cannot say that because I'm doing Agile, there's no risk in my project, the Agile project, right? Every project doesn't matter which methodology you use, which techniques you use, which tools you use. Every project has some risk, and so to ignore risk in the Agile world is just not the right practice, right? You do have to take it seriously. Those of you who have been hit by risks that suddenly came and materialized themselves can appreciate why this is very, very important. So we always want to take care of risk in Agile, just as, the same as in Waterfall. And we will see, like I said earlier, that in the Agile world, risk is really sort of like built in, risk management or risk reduction of whatever you want, mitigation, whatever you want to call it. Okay, Agile was originally, to some extent at least, driven by risk concerns, right? For those of you who know how Agile came to be, the famous manifesto and Agile manifesto and so on. And so Agile, from the beginning, its basic design, even though nobody called it risk mitigation, had characteristics which helped from the risk point of view. We're going to cover a few of those right now. So we will see what kind of risk mitigation you already have built in sort of like automatically into Agile. And then we'll move on to see what else can you do beyond that. And in my opinion, what you should do beyond that in order to manage risk. in your Agile projects. Okay, so let's start actually by the Agile Manifesto. I hope all of you know it. And what I want to do is I want to look, if you remember, I'll show it in a minute, I'll expose it in a minute. The Agile Manifesto has 4 values. I hope you're familiar with those. Let's take a minute to look at those values one by one and see how each one of them actually handles risks and how each one of them helps manage risk and reduce risk. Okay, so the first one, I hope again you're familiar with those, says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Okay, anybody wants to give some kind of your own thoughts? How does this help with mitigating risk? There's no perfect or correct answer, so do not hesitate. It's a totally safe environment. Any thoughts? That's okay. We'll take some time to warm you up, and that is okay. So you can think about it that the idea here is that we prefer to talk to people directly, one-on-one or in groups or whatever, and interact with the people who are involved in the project rather than rely on tools and processes and things like that. That in itself is risk mitigation because tools are not that good with identifying risk. Tools are just sort of like dumb things, right? They will do what you tell them. No tool will jump and say, hey, I'm identifying a risk here. I'm noticing something that I'm worried about. But if you talk to people and you work with people and you do it interactively and extensively the way you should do in Agile, right? People are different. They will tell you what they're worried about. They will point out risks. They will alert you to risks. So that in itself, just the idea of talk to people, be sure to interact with people rather than completely relying on tools. That in itself helps you mitigate risks in your project. What about working products over comprehensive documentation or project?
Okay.
I'm sharing, right?
Yes.
Ooh, good recovery. Sorry, head blocker. I'm going to kill them later. All right. So again, where do you think you see risk mitigation when I say it's more important to do working products than comprehensive documentation? Where do you see risk mitigation in here? Any ideas?
Well, always by building something, you're learning and uncovering. You're gaining knowledge, and gaining knowledge in and of itself is a risk mitigation, as opposed to just sitting and waiting.
I love it.
Which is what's on the right.
That's right. I love it. Actually, I haven't thought about it this way. This is actually an additional concept I hadn't thought about. I love it. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Yeah, totally agree. By actually doing the work, you learn from it, and I'm just trying to repeat what you said, right? And by gaining more knowledge and insight into your work, into your product, and so on, you're more knowledgeable. Knowledge is power. And your risk will reduce. I love it. Any other thoughts about this?
This is Karen.
Please.
So to me, like comprehensive documentation is a narrow focus, and working product is a much wider focus. So, and so as far as risk mitigation, you're not just looking at something with a very narrow, rote kind of documentation focus. You're looking at a bigger picture where you can probably see a greater risk and greater opportunity.
More opportunity to see risk. Yes, agree. Great, thank you. Yes. I think there was somebody else who tried to say something.
Yeah, I think for both of these that we see on the screen now, on the left side, you expedite uncovering problems or risks sooner. By talking to people, you talk about risks sooner, and therefore you have a sooner opportunity to fix it or address it. By having working products in front of the customer, you reduce risk by getting on the right path as soon as possible and not waiting to months and months after comprehensive documentation is written and then code is written where you might find those issues. So in both cases, I think you're moving and finding risk sooner than you would otherwise.
I totally agree. And that is really unique to Agile, right? You don't have it in waterfall, where you work on the product and whatever on your project for God knows, I don't know, 10 months, 8 months, 12 months, and then you turn it over to the customer and you pray. This is a different situation here, definitely. And I want to say it actually add to what the two of you said. I want to add some more flavor from my own perspective. Is if you think for a moment, ultimately, at the end of the project, what really counts, the product, the working product, or the documentation, right? What is the goal of the project? The goal of the project is the product, okay? And so by making it a rule that working product, notice, by the way, everybody, this is not a product. It doesn't say product. It says working product. So by emphasizing that it's very, very important to make sure that your product works, and works early on, like Andy said, you have to make it work, at least partially, right from the first sprint, okay, at least theoretically, right? This is a huge reduction in risk because the customer gets to see the product right from the start and can alert you if there are problems and so on. So that's a huge risk reduction right there by implementing this concept of working products. Great, I like that. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations are almost, I think I kind of said it a minute ago. Can somebody elaborate on that? How does it mitigate the risk?
Got customer early means that we know what we're doing is what they're wanting.
And yeah, I agree, as simple as that, right? Again, at the end of the day, you can do a billion things in your project, but the only thing that really counts at the end of the project is the customer happy? Did they get what they wanted? Right? That's the only thing that really counts at the end. Everything else is designed to help and support it, but the goal of the project is not documentation, it's not talking, it's not presentations, it's not whatever. It is delivering something to the customer that makes the customer happy. So customer collaboration is the best way to ensure it, right? To ensure that the customer is happy, huge risk mitigation. And the last one,
Moshe?
Yes.
Before you go on, it's kind of an interesting question about the contract negotiation because it depends upon who you are. From a legal standpoint,
Right.
Contract negotiation is the risk mitigation. It is to get everything spelled out so that when the delivery doesn't happen and the lawsuit happens, you can go, hey, here's the contract. We're covered. We didn't deliver this and it doesn't say we delivered it. Just a different vantage point.
No, I totally agree. This is actually an interesting point. I want to say a few words about that. So first of all, you are right. Contract negotiation is about mitigating legal risk. So yes, contract negotiation does mitigate legal risk. However, Agile people don't like it. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but they don't like it because the mindset is we don't want to even think about a situation where we need to get to the court and present a contract to protect us. If we get to this point, we have failed. The Agile people say, we don't want to get there. That's why we want customer collaboration, so we don't have to get there. If we have true collaboration with our customer, true collaboration, where we feel our customer is our partner, and the customer feels that we are their partner, truly, then we will work together. We will work together, we will make it work. So I agree, technically you're absolutely right. Contract negotiations are about reducing or minimizing legal risk, but Agile doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's people may disagree that it's not we need to have it and whatever, but this is the Agile mindset. That's why they say over, right? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And I'm sorry, yes. And responding to change over following a plan is also risk mitigation, because if you stick with the plan at any cost and something changed in the world, customer changed their ideas, customer changed their requirements, or whoever or whatever it is that changed in your project, but you say, no, we have a plan. We're going to follow our plan. We committed to that plan. You just, heading for failure. And so that also the idea that it's okay to change, and we will adapt ourselves to the change instead of trying to resist change, reduces greatly our risk exposure in front of our customers and our stakeholders. So you can see how these four things alone in the agile world already present risk mitigation almost like automatic built-in mechanism, right? That you don't even have to do anything. You just have to follow these principles. Now let's move on to the 12 principles that hopefully you're also familiar with those. I'm not going to go over all of those. It's too much, but I'm giving you a few seconds. Please review and pick any one of those that you want and tell us what you think. How do you think each one of the one you picked helps mitigate risk in the project? Anyone?
How about number 10?
Please. Simplicity.
Well, if you focus on not focusing on work that isn't needed, then by its very nature you're going to finish earlier. Because otherwise you're spending time doing things that aren't required.
Either aren't required or just complicated unnecessarily.
Yes.
Right?
Very good. Yes.
Extraneous, basically extraneous.
Mhm.
So yeah, I totally agree with you. So it's as simple as that. If you are able to do things simply, the risk is less. The more complex and complicated your work is, the more risky it is. I don't think I have to convince you on that. I hope so. I don't have to convince you on that. Any other of these 12 that you want to point out?
Four, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Communication means that any problems coming up, we'll be able to address sooner.
Absolutely. People work together. Business people work with the development team or delivery team together on a daily basis. Will make things so much better, so much smoother, and will identify risks much earlier and make sure that all these different stakeholders are coordinated on the same page. So it's a pretty straightforward thing, right? And there are more you could think about. I don't want to spend time on this anymore, but you can think about the number one, right? Highest priority to satisfy the customer. So, and think about if you work now or you worked in the past in an agile environment, in a Scrum team or whatever, did they really always prioritize customer satisfaction at the top? Okay. If they did, they probably had a very good experience, probably. Because if the customer is happy, you can say pretty much anything else is unimportant and you will be successful. So just to do that, to satisfy the customer, put it at the top priority is a huge risk mitigation technique, right? Or trick, whatever you call it. So again and again, each one of those, I don't want to spend all the time on this. Each one of those has some risk mitigation flavor in it, and I hope you can appreciate it. And that's an example of why Agile, in many cases, is a good approach to managing projects. So let me just summarize a few of the points here. So frequent delivery with feedback is a risk mitigating activity, right? And it's basic for Agile. Short development cycles to get the customer to see what we do very quickly and very soon and frequently and give us feedback. Huge mitigation of risk. The business, you just mentioned it a minute ago, business is part of the development team. So we make sure that the business and us, the delivery team, we are all on the same page. No surprises towards the end. High responsiveness to change. We react to change favorably, quickly, no problem. Risk mitigation, and high collaboration between the team and the customer. And there are others, but these are maybe the important points. So take maybe a minute and see if there are any questions around that before I go to the next chapter, if you will. Okay, so this summarizes what I wanted to show the first part of this presentation, which is Agile already has risk built in, risk management built in. But let's move forward a little bit. And we can see, I'll show you some challenges around risk mitigation in Agile, where even though, like I said, it's built in, there are like holes, right? Things which are not covered at all or not covered well. Okay. First of all, Agile is product focused. For those of you who are familiar, Agile doesn't like so much to talk about projects. It talks about products. Excuse me. And so Agile treats products better, product risk better. We just saw all these different examples of how it's built in, right? But we are focused only on the product, delivering the product, developing the product, implementing product features. And so we have a lot of risk mitigation in that area. But what about all these areas? And there are some others that I'm sure I didn't mention, okay? All right, what about financial risk? What about environmental risk? What about legal risk? We talked about that briefly. And there are all sorts, of other risks. Who takes care of those in the Agile world? Again, for those of you who work or worked in the past in an Agile environment, think about it, where you worked. Who took care of those? Was there anybody who took care of those? Did the Agile team deal with any of these things and took care of them and mitigate risks in those areas? I would guess not, but I'm happy to hear if anybody has a better experience. Okay, so that's one area, this focus on the product, which, by the way, I think is a good focus. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's focused entirely on the product. The team, the Agile team, the only thing they care about is we have a product, we have to develop it, we have to create the features. Nobody thinks about any other aspect, okay? Another area is risk management process. There is no formal risk management process in Agile. I haven't seen any for sure in any team I worked with, and I worked quite a bit of teams and organizations in Agile. None of them ever did I see a formal process that says this is how we work on risk in our projects. Whereas in the waterfall world, also you don't see it a lot, but at least there are formal techniques and methodologies and all of those things to handle risks. Those of you who, for example, did the PMP certificate, I'm sure you're familiar with risk management in waterfall. Okay, but in Agile, you don't see that. You don't see this deliberate, intentional investment in risk management process, and that's a failure. Okay, another area, excuse me, is the Agile team focus, right? So in Agile, the focus is on the team. There's a team that has to, like I said earlier, that has to deliver the product, and that's it. There's no risk management organization. There's no risk management process of any sort, or tools, or anything of that sort, right? And excuse me. And there is no project manager. There's no risk manager, not in the organization, not in the individual teams. So risk, other than the part that I mentioned earlier, risk is built in, risk mitigation, it's not being taken care of at all. Okay? And so when you ask, I would say, Agile gurus, let's say Agile gurus, you ask them, so how do we handle, who owns risk in Agile? The usual answer is the team owns it. Okay, and I'm saying, show me an example of one single team that you know about that spent any time at all on risk management. I haven't seen it. Not only have I not seen it, I think it's not practical, or it may be very difficult. And the reason is because the team usually are expert in their domain. Okay, if there's a software team, they know how to do software. If it's a financial team project, they know how to do, they are expert in finances. Legal, they are expert in legal. Nobody knows risk management. It's not part of your usual skill set, not part of your normal educational track. So they just don't know how to do it. More than that, not only do they not know how to do it, they don't care. They don't want to do it. A software engineer will say, why are you bothering me with risk? I'm a software developer. I write code, right? A legal person, maybe because they like it. Finance person will say, I deal with money. I'm an expert in money, in finance. Why are you bothering with this? So that's not working very well, to just say the team should take care of it. Although you will see later on that one of the approaches is of that kind, but it's not trivial at all, right? There's also a sort of a complacency in teams where we deliver to the customer, we develop the features for the product, and there's no sense of pressure to take care of risks. Why? Because, if there's a problem in this sprint, we'll take care of it in the next sprint. Because we get feedback quickly from our customer, which is beautiful. And so we know what the problem is, we'll fix it. So we don't try to manage risk. We don't try to anticipate. But the problem is that at the end of the day, we are working on projects, and projects are longer term. And it's not enough to work from sprint to sprint and hope everything will be okay. And if there's a problem, we'll work on it next sprint. You have to look a little bit more deeply into the future, look at the whole project comprehensively, and see bigger problems that are coming down further down in the future, maybe 3 months from now, maybe 4 months from now. You cannot wait until they hit you. That's not a good idea, because this approach basically says we will not worry about risk. We will wait for the risk to hit us, and then we'll worry about it. That's not risk management and not risk mitigation for sure. Okay, so that's also sort of a shortcoming of the agile mindset, at least what I've seen. So just trying to show you that the existing risk mitigation, built-in mitigation things that you see today that we covered are really not enough. So let's go to the next part and talk a little bit about, okay, so what can we do? What should we do? And we'll talk about several different, like I said, tricks and techniques that you can use, okay? We will start at the team level, where you can do really in each team quite a bit of contribution to help mitigate risks. Let's talk about some ideas. First of all, and that's, I think, like the most fundamental concept is you need to make sure that the team is aware that risk mitigation is important. And that's, of course, not enough, because like I said earlier, the team members usually do not know how to manage risk. Managing risk is not an intuitive thing. You have to have some kind of a process. You have to understand concepts of risk. Again, those of you who studied risk or project management in a more formal way, maybe the PMP, you are surely familiar with the risk management, more formal techniques, right? Risk identification, risk planning, risk mitigation, risk recovery, all these concepts. It's not something you're born with. And so the first thing you need to do is to give your team some basics in risk management, right? What does it mean to manage risk? We need to identify the risk. We need to plan risk mitigation. We need to implement risk mitigation techniques. We need to decide what strategies to use, all these kinds of things. That, like I said, you don't learn it in school. You have to get some training. So give your team some training. And usually, leadership will say, training and risk management is not that important. It's too much money. We don't want to spend money on that. What I'm saying is, I'm not expecting the team people to become expert in risk management. We're talking only about the basics. And the basics shouldn't be too hard to learn. And you don't have to send them to some, 6-week training or something. Somebody who knows risk management in the company could be even the Scrum Master or somebody in the team. In a 2-3 hour presentation and maybe a little practice, they will get the basic skills that they need. So you shouldn't look at it as like an overkill, a big, very expensive and heavyweight thing. In Agile, we like to do things lightweight. Give them a presentation, they will understand. It's not, rocket science. But that's the basic thing, basic training, okay? So they know. Once they know what it means to manage risk, you want to put in place some kind of a process. Okay, how are we going to manage risk in our team? All right. So how are we doing it? What will be the process? What kind of responsibilities? Who will be doing what? Who is in charge of what? Who has accountability for what, right? What are we going to use? Some tools? Are we going to use a spreadsheet? Are we going to use an online tool, an application? I don't know. What are we going to use? What are the responsibilities for each role and each member of the team, if there are any? Are we going to use any templates? If it's an online tool, maybe the tool has templates. If it's not an online tool, maybe we want to shape our own form our own templates and so on. I don't want it to sound like something big, complicated, and heavyweight. The team will decide what makes sense for them, so it's not very heavy. Okay, so the process does not have to be a document of 200 pages. It could be a one-page document, but it lays out who needs to do what when. Not very complicated. And it's unique typically for the team, the way they want to work, or sometimes the organization will help standardize this process for multiple teams. Any questions so far? All right, so train the team, put some processes in place, lightweight processes, and let's go a little bit deeper in some of these items. Excuse me. In terms of roles, I think the minimum probably that you want to do is assign or have somebody from your team volunteer to be the risk manager. Again, it sounds big and heavy, but it doesn't have to. But you want to find somebody who will volunteer to be the risk manager. And better yet, if possible, maybe do it in rotation. So maybe every sprint or every 2 sprints, somebody else takes care of it. And all they have to do really, in my opinion, in an agile environment, is to encourage the people to call out when they see risks, keep some sort of a list of the known risks, and make sure that these risks are giving some attention. All right, I don't want to make it more heavy than that. But acknowledge the risks, identify the risks, acknowledge that there are risks, and ask yourself as a team, what are we going to do about them? And figure out some strategy, what we're going to do about them. And I'll say some more about that. Okay. But as a minimum, just assign somebody in the team, either individual or in rotation. All right. Put in, you can use the risk management techniques you learned for the PMP, for example. And that's, although you do it lightweight, you do it much more lightweight, right? But follow those steps that you already learned, right? Do the risk identification, do the risk assessment, do the risk responses, and so on. It doesn't have to be a PhD here. Make it light, make it simple. And if you don't identify all the 200 risks in your project, at least identify the first 5 or the first 10 that everybody is really worried about, and take care of those. And that's how you make it lighter. So you don't try to do a very thorough job, but at least the most important ones. So do some process, put some process in place. And I'm going to go now and give some more specific suggestions. All of these, as you can see, these are tricks and techniques. Nothing here is like, you must do it this way or else, risk management will not work. So I'm going to go over some suggestions of things you can do. This is kind of a typical picture for those of you familiar with Scrum, how you do Scrum. You have here the full Scrum cycle, or if you want, a framework. You have the product owner, you have the product backlog. For those of you who are not familiar, I apologize. I will assume that you are familiar with those concepts. You have the meetings that you have in Scrum, right? The sprint planning meeting, the daily Scrum meeting, the sprint review, sprint retrospective, and so on. You have the 1 to 4 week sprints. You have the 24-hour daily Scrum meeting, Scrum Master, and so on and so forth. You have those basic ideas. And I'm going to show, for many of these components that you see here, you can incorporate or integrate little tricks and ideas that help you mitigate and manage risk. Let's start with the product backlog. For those of you who don't know, the product backlog basically is a collection of all the work that we want to do in this project. That's a simple definition. All the work we want to do in this project, we collect it as a list of tasks, if you want, in the product backlog. One of the things that I've never seen almost at any team at all is the estimation of stories that takes into account risk. And this is a common mistake, I would say, or a miss on the part of the teams. Teams usually say, how hard is to do it? It's going to take me 5 days to do this work. Okay, I'll give it a weight of 6, whatever, a weight of 8 points. So they usually measure, or the weight, if you want, of a story by story points, of course, just based on how much work is there. But actually, you need to incorporate also risk. So you have the 3 components here. The size of the story is a function of the effort to do it, the complexity of the thing you need to do, and the risk. Where the risk is, do we anticipate any problems during the work when we implement this thing, when we want to implement this story? If there are unknowns, there are risk points. If the team says, yes, we think we know how to do it, but if there's a but, there's a risk. Okay? If there's a risk, you have to add points. So if the team says, oh, it's going to take me 5 days, so I'm going to give it 8 points, but there's a risk, then increase it to 13 points or whatever you decide to do. Add more points to cover for the risk. Very, very simple trick. So simple, it just takes a minute to do it. When you do story refinements, you must remember to ask the team members, have you accounted for risk? Have you thought about the risks in this story? And add points to compensate for risk. So that's one trick you can do. Okay, you can write risk stories actually. So in the product backlog, you don't enter necessarily only new features for the product, which is the classical thing, right? New features for the products, like requirements, features, and so on. You can write dedicated risk stories. Okay, so there are stories which actually talk about a single specific risk. Each story will talk about the risk, and in this way, you make sure to capture the risks, and now they are written down and they are official. Okay, in waterfall, usually what you do is a risk log. You have a list, some kind of a spreadsheet or something, and a list of risks, it's called the risk log. Here, instead of using a risk log, you just write a story for each one of the risks. You can also have a way to highlight this story to show that it is a risk type story. It's a story of type risk to distinguish it from feature stories. Okay? And that's another technique. Of course, once you define risk stories, it makes it very effective and efficient and easy to push them into the sprint. Now there are stories. So now you can mitigate stories. You can actually you can mitigate risk. You can work on actual resolution of risk by simply putting or pushing stories, risk stories, into the sprint, and they become part of the scope of the sprint that you need to work on and fix. This makes it, ensures that you not only identified risks, you actually work on them, you actually do something. Okay, so you include risk stories in your sprints. Another thing you can do, of course, is also prioritize them. Once they are in the product backlog or in the sprint backlog, you can prioritize them and you can decide how critical they are compared to the features that you want to implement in this particular sprint. So prioritization is a very powerful tool, very easy and simple. Okay. During the daily stand-up, the daily Scrum meeting, you need to assess the sprint risk. In fact, when I coach teams, so let me start by saying, those of you who are involved and active, let's say in Scrum teams, you probably know that we are taught during this meeting, the daily Scrum meeting, we are taught usually to answer the 3 famous questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? Do I have any obstacles? Right? Modern thought is actually moving away from that. Or at least we're saying it's not really mandatory or very important to do it that way. The most important thing in this meeting, it's a daily meeting, right? It's a daily meeting. The most important thing that you want to accomplish in this meeting is answer one question. That, at least this is what I coach teams, is the answer to one question, which is, Are you on track to finish this sprint successfully? Yes or no? Are you on track to finish this sprint successfully? Yes or no? If you come out of this meeting and you don't know the answer to this question, it's a concern. Okay? And if you do know the answer to this question, then you actually have assessed the sprint risk. This is what I mean by assess the sprint risk. So there are sometimes a little other components in this meeting. You will talk about maybe obstacles, which are important and things like that. But at the end of the day, really, you want to come out having a good sense. Are we going to finish this sprint successfully? Are we still on track? And if not, what do we need to do? And I call it assess the sprint risk. Okay.
Question, just based on your experience, if that's all right. So when you ask the question of are we on track to complete the sprint successfully, how many times have developers said no, we're not? And what generally happens when that does happen?
Yeah, if they say not, then, and I'm very thankful if they say not, because it gives me the opportunity to start opening the discussion and digging and finding the bad places. I will ask them to explain and elaborate. I will encourage the team to talk about it more. Do they agree with him? Do they not? Is it true or not? And then, of course, most importantly, if they figure out that, yes, we do have a problem, we're not going to finish successfully, we're not going to fix it during the meeting, but we do have to take action immediately after the meeting to see how can we try to bring things back on track. Did I answer your question? I think that's what you asked.
Yeah, I was wondering also how often team members will say no, we're not going to meet it. Because in my experience is that they won't say it because it's kind of saying, hey, I'm bad, I'm not going to do my work. And that's a bit of psychological safety where it doesn't sort of bring out that conversation where if we sort of say, hey, maybe go to the three questions, hey, what did we do yesterday? What are we going to do today? It can raise some questions from the other team members to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, it might help. I'm not saying it might help, but you're absolutely right. I saw both ways. I saw teams where people were intimidated or uncomfortable, whatever you want to call it, and didn't speak up, even though they thought we were in trouble. And I did see that. You are absolutely right. And I saw some other teams where people were vocal and they spoke up. And it all boils down to one thing, which is very simple to understand, very difficult to do, which is psychological safety. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this concept. Basically, psychological safety is a nice concept, a nice word for, do I feel comfortable to speak up in front of my friends? Okay, if I don't feel comfortable to speak up, means I do not have psychological safety. I don't feel psychological safety, and that's not good for the team. And one of the most important, or very important responsibility of the Scrum Master is to try to build or how we want to call it, psychological safety within the team. So bring the team to a state where the team members feel it's okay for me to speak up. It's okay for me to open my mouth, complain, or point out, raise the flag, things like that. I know that I'm going to be listened to. I know that I'm going to be taken seriously. I know I'm not going to be overruled casually. I know I'm not going to be mocked at. Nobody's going to make fun of me or dismissive and all of those. How do we accomplish this? Maybe I'll do another presentation on that. That's a big topic. It's not trivial. Yeah. I hope it's good enough for right now, an answer.
Yeah, it is. And actually that psychological safety is a risk to the team as well. Maybe I would go down as a risk story.
Absolutely. I've heard endless Scrum Masters complain. I feel like the team members don't want to speak up. They're afraid, they're intimidated, whatever. And I know there's problems. I cannot do anything because nobody says. And I know that later in the project, what will hit the fan, right? And so again, I've been struggling with this also. And what I did, I worked very hard to find ways to make the team feel comfortable to speak up. Okay, and there are all kinds of ways. You make passionate speeches to them to say speak up. You show as an example that you speak up. You don't hesitate to speak up. You make sure that if somebody does speak up, nobody can cancel them, make fun of them, overrule them, all these kinds of things. By example, hopefully you slowly build this group psychological safety.
Moshe, if you don't mind me adding to this
Please,
topic, because this is a topic that is really close to my heart.
please.
I just showed you a few minutes ago a technique that is called the failure bow. I made a mistake, and I openly said about that. Oh, I made a mistake. How fascinating.
Yes.
By doing that, you release some of your authority. And I had a story when I was able to make a VP of mid-sized bank, like 5,000 people organization, to perform a failure bow in front of the entire cybersecurity organization. That was an effect of the exploded bomb. Like 80 pair of eyes were widely open. 80 jars are dropped at the floor. Oh, if he can make a mistake and speak openly about that, that means I can do that. That's a really, really powerful tool. So please feel free to add this tool to your tool belt. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Back to you, Moshe.
Yes,
Sorry
yes,
for interrupting.
absolutely. No. The contrary. I want to hear ideas, and absolutely. And I found at least that I in my teams when I was a Scrum Master or whatever, I made sure to admit mistakes, be open about it, or tell them that when I feel uncomfortable, or tell them when I'm worried about myself, even not about others, about myself. And when they see that I'm honest and I'm open, it helps. I cannot guarantee. And like I said, this is probably a topic that Sasha will be happy to give a presentation of his own around safety, right? Psychological safety. It's super important because one of the most significant team killers is psychological safety, lack of psychological safety. The team will not function. It will be a dysfunctional team. So you're absolutely right. Okay.
Yeah, I've never had the question to the team work that says, are there any risks? That never works. However, as a Scrum Master in particular, you're with the team daily, especially the daily stand-up, and you know what's going on in the sprint and with the sprint backlog, are you going to make it or not? If you see somebody, for example, in the sprint 3 days in a row who's working on a relatively small or medium-sized story, struggling to get it done, and you can call it out as a Scrum Master. You can say, hey, this seems like it's maybe a risk. Do we need to call it out as a risk? And that alone gives them the opportunity to say, yeah, it is a risk. If you allow them, like Sasha said, the psychological safety, is this a risk? Do we need to call it out? You're kind of forcing the issue, yes or no. And if they say no, okay, fine, drop it. If they say yes, then track it according to, the information we heard earlier, and then come back to it the next day. Maybe you go to that person later and say, okay, how can we mitigate this risk? Let them be part of the solving of the mitigation of the risk, and take the ownership of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think, Doug, you want to say something? You're mute.
Sorry. One of the techniques I really like, and I'm looking at the name of the gentleman who I learned it from at one of Chris Sims's organizations. It's based on a book called Risk Up Front, Adam Joseph. Is that I always ask the team on every endeavor is, what is the most likely reason the project will fail?
Nice.
And you get really, really, really interesting and deep thoughts about what's keeping them up at night.
Absolutely. And what's keeping you up at night, by the way, is another good question.
Yes.
What's keeping you up at night? That's a very good question. So yeah, with your permission, I will continue. I don't want to, run you late this evening. As you can see, this is a fascinating topic. I think it deserves its own, session. So I will just continue. But yeah, it's a great topic. Okay, the next thing, a little trick, again, trick of the trade. review the product risk. Okay, during the sprint review session, that you, again, if you're doing Scrum, review the product risk, not just the product itself. And I think lastly, use the retrospective meeting in order to find ways and techniques and opportunities to improve how you manage risk. So you can bring it up as a specific question. How are we managing risk in our team? Do we see opportunities for improvement? Okay, so I'm just showing you how you can plug in many little tricks to mitigate and manage risk throughout the entire cycle. And these are all little things, relatively little things, easily done. Scrum and Agile doesn't like heavyweight stuff. Okay, I'll go over this quickly because I mentioned it before. You can write risk stories. So if you identify a risk, instead of maintaining a risk log, you actually write a story for it, which ensures that you will be forced to think, okay, I have it in the product backlog, I got to do something about it, right? I cannot ignore it. It's right there among all the other features. I have risk stories. What do I do about them? And you can even, as I said earlier, move them higher and higher in the priority list towards the top, which gives them priority. And you push them in earlier. They should be, their priority should be judged compared to all the other stories, the non-risk stories, just like any story. And sometimes feature stories will be higher priority, but sometimes, if you do it right, risk stories will be higher priority, and that's fine. Just treat them like any other story.
Can you give an example of a risk story?
If you identify any risk in your project, okay, anything I'm worried that the customer will not be happy about something, or I think in the future we are expecting a certain delivery and the certain delivery will not come on time and we will be late. I don't know. Anything like that, you just put it a story for it. And then people have to start thinking, what do we do? How do we mitigate that? How do we fix it? But the important thing here is it's a story. It is not written in some separate document that we must remember to look in this separate document. We don't have to remember to look in a separate document. It's a story, like any other story. It will be in front of our eyes whenever we look at the product backlog, right? We cannot escape it. So we'll have to do something about it. That's the power of putting it in the product backlog, using it as using a story for that. Okay, and of course you can put it in the Kanban board when you track progress during the sprint. You can put it in a Kanban board. Experts call it a risk-modified Kanban board. Basically, it's a Kanban board that also contains individual specific risk stories that the team has decided and agreed to work on in this sprint. And you can give it even a color code or a flag or whatever to mark it separately. Or sometimes I see some teams, the subject line of the story, they put the word risk at the beginning to indicate that this is a risk story. So there are different tricks. But the idea is make a story, put it in the Kanban board, track it like any other story, make it have its own color or something so you can identify that this is a risk story compared to a feature story. But it's nice to put in the Kanban board. Good trick. Another trick, a technique you can use is to do what's called swarming, risk swarming. Swarming, basically, for those of you not familiar, is you say to the team, drop everything. We need all of us, all hands on deck to work on this particular problem. So people stop working on the things they do. And for example, they dedicate a full sprint to a problem to try together as a team to hack it out because it's a very tough problem. And having all the team jumping on a single problem, working together, it's called swarming. And you can decide, for example, that you're going to do a swarming sprint for risk mitigation, where you work only on risks in this sprint. So the product owner is going to be angry because he will not expect new features in this sprint. But it's of course a balance work. If we have severe risks that we are very worried about and we see it's going to hurt us badly, it might be useful for the team to decide we're going to do a swarming It could be a full sprint, could be part of the sprint. It's flexible, but it's an option you have. Think about it. Why not? If you identify a risk that's really concerning, why not drop everything for 1 week or 2 weeks and jump the whole team on this thing and get it out of the way once and for all, and you can relax and go back to regular work after that. So that's the idea of swarming. Another idea, do a risk burn down chart. So those of you who are familiar with a burn down chart, you can do a separate risk burn down chart, which contains only the risk stories. And you can see how well you progress in killing or resolving the risk problems one after the other. In this example here, you can see you do it over multiple iterations. You can see from iteration to iteration how the number of risk stories goes down and down all the time. So it helps you make sure that you don't just write the risk, you actually do work on it. You do something about it, right? Now, those of you familiar with SAFE, okay, SAFE has a prioritization formula that helps determine priority of stories. Which stories do I want to work on now? Okay, WestJeff, it's called WestJeff, or weighted shortest job first. I'm not going to go into all the details. You can read it up in literature, but the formula is cost of delay divided by job duration. The more you delay working on something, the more costly it's going to be, right? So you want to make it higher in the priority list, so the cost of delay would not be high. And of course, the longer the job duration, the less attractive the story is, the less exciting, because it's a lot of work and it goes down by priority. So that's the formula. If you want to incorporate risk, you modify it a little bit, and you can do cost of delay multiplied by risk, or additive, cost of delay plus risk. It depends on which unit you use. So you multiply it by risk, and in this way, you add weight to high-risk stories. High-risk stories become higher priority. The number goes up because you multiply by the risk and the risk exposure, for example. And so the weighted, the WestJet, basically the prioritization weight goes up, and so a story with a high risk becomes higher priority automatically. So that's another trick you can use to help you prioritize risk stories against feature stories. Okay, or not even feature stories can have their own risk. The last section I want to cover today, I talked so far about techniques you can do within your team. What about scaling? This is more complex, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail there, but things you can do and should do. And if not you, your leadership should do it. It is not very effective, or not effective enough, if each team separately, individually, manages their own risk. There has to be an organizational level risk management plan, which, because it's an organization level, it's a high level, it covers the leadership and the project leadership, the project management, portfolio level, and so on, will be a little bit more similar to the PMP style, to the waterfall style. You want to put in a management framework, risk management framework. I'm not going to go over this because, again, if you did waterfall risk, this is roughly what it is at that level. The thing you need to remember that's useful, in my opinion, in Agile is once you define actual risk, you have a list of risks, you want to bubble them down or feed them down to the individual teams as appropriate, and ask them to help mitigate those risks. So the organization feeds risks down. Also, the risks at the organizational level are more strategic kind of risks. They don't talk about, okay, what's my risk for the next sprint, right? That is at the team level. The leadership will look more at things like, are we on time to deliver the entire project? Budgetary things, compliance things, legal problems, but those have to also many times bubble down to individual teams to help mitigate as appropriate. So that's what you want to do. The last thing I'm going to mention, which is some teams, it's popular again from SAFE, is the Rome board. You can see the Rome board on the right-hand side. It's resolved, owned, accepted and mitigated. Basically, the idea here is when you do planning, and in SAFe you do what's called the PI planning, program increment planning, which is typically 3 months planning in cycles of 3 months, quarterly, right? You identify risks. This is part of the SAFe process for those of you who are SAFe certified. So you add risks to this to the list of things you want to do. This is happening during the PI planning, and then at the end, when there's the final plan review, during the PI planning, there's the final plan review. You can move them into a board, which is like this board, and then leadership can have their own board. Individual teams can have their own board, and they put their risks on these boards, and they move those risks around these 4 quadrants to track progress and resolution. Okay, so again, I'm not saying this is the way you must do it. I'm saying these are tools that are available to you in your toolbox. Use them wisely. Let's summarize. Lastly, as I said, all projects have risk, right? That's include Agile. Product risk mitigation is built naturally into Agile, into Scrum. We saw those things, but you want to enhance risk management, okay? Especially for the non-product areas, which is not covered well. You want to train your team some basic training so they understand and they have awareness that it is an important thing and part of their responsibilities. You want to implement team-level techniques and tools and responsibilities and so on. And you want to add a risk management layer at the organizational level that will bubble down as necessary. That's all I wanted to cover today. I hope it brought you some value. And as far as I'm concerned, Sasha, if we have time, I'm open for questions and comments.
Thank you, Moshe. That's a great presentation. Folks, we are open for questions. Feel free to just raise your hand and ask. If you feel more comfortable to do this over the chat, be my guest. I'll be monitoring the chat as well. So I see Andy has his hand up. Please, Andy.
Yeah, not really a question, but this is a masterclass in risk management in an agile world. This is one of the, I have never seen anything this good before that really covers the gambit of what us as Agilists need to think about and do, and ideas. Going into the presentation, I had my own experience that I've gained over many, many years, and this really covered everything I knew and a lot more. So definitely hope that this presentation is available for people to refer to in the future and maybe start implementing now. And the videos, definitely, you could probably monetize these, Sasha, on YouTube.
Not in my plans, at least.
I'll just collect some royalty.
Yeah, this is really good. In today's world, I think, the role of Scrum Master and Program Manager is often conflated. And what happens in that case? Risk management, or I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Karen, talking about, RAID type things, risks, actions, impediments, dependencies. All of these things are kind of tied together, and you can take these ideas and apply it to a RAID, management process as well.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much. Yep.
Okay, any more questions? Going once, going twice. Thank you, Moshe. That was probably one of the best presentations we had in this group. Really, I really applaud the structure of it, the logic. It was really well done. Thank you. Let's give Moshe a big round of applause, folks. With this said, I am stopping the